Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the Swiss Shooting Museum in Bern, Switzerland, taking a look at a couple of really cool experimental Swiss self-loading rifles. This is a Stamm-Zeller rifle. As is normal with a dual name of that sort, this was designed by a guy named Hans Stamm. It was manufactured by a company called Zeller SC. They were actually an embroidery manufacturing company, or a company that made embroidery tools. This was located in a small eastern canton in Switzerland called Appenzell, known for embroidery and cheese, but I think the cheese is just because it's in Switzerland. But Hans Stamm is a guy who's born in 1857, and he goes to work for Zeller and Company as a draftsman working on embroidery tools. He's hired in 1890, and in the early 1890s, like 92 to 94, there's a bit of a depression in Switzerland. The company needs another way to make money, and so they start taking contracts to make rifle parts for the military. And after a couple years of this, by 1896, they're maybe not doing so many of these one-off contracts, but they decide that this is a potentially good source for income for the company. And so they open a weapons division of the company, and they put Stamm, Hans Stamm, in charge of it. He's gotten really interested in this, and he's shown an aptitude for it. Now, he will spend the next couple of years working on a long-stroke gas piston semi-automatic rifle, which he patents in 1902. And between 1902 and 1905, this company that he works for manufactures either 5 or 6 samples of the rifle. And we have one of them right here, courtesy of the Swiss Shooting Museum. So I'll tell you what they did with it, but first, let's take a look at how this works. It is a remarkably simple and efficient gas piston design for being as early as it was, patented in 1902. Normally, we would start by looking at the markings, but there are in fact no markings whatsoever on this. Of the apparently 6 manufactured, 2 of them were serialized. There's a number 1 and a number 2 that were made, and the other 4 have no markings at all, and that includes this one. So at a very rough level overview, what we essentially have is a straight pull rifle. So this has a bolt, and we'll take it apart in just a moment, but this has a bolt with an internal cam inside this bolt carrier. So when you pull the charging handle back, the bolt rotates, and you can actually see it rotating there. There's a gas port drilled in the barrel that connects to a gas piston here on the side. One of the nice things about working with straight pull bolt action rifles from an inventor's perspective here is that they're very simple theoretically to convert to semi-auto, because all you need is a piston to push the bolt back, and the internal mechanism of the bolt is already set up to rotate to lock and unlock. So this isn't strictly a Schmidt-Rubin like 1889 pattern bolt, but it works on all the same principles. Anyway, the gas piston comes back here. We have a bolt carrier there. There is a rather clever safety here. In order to engage the safety, you just pull it back and push it downward into the receiver. That locks it in place. This safety lever is physically screwed to the tail of the firing pin, so if it's locked in here, it can't go forward and the rifle can't fire. So with the safety disengaged, if I pull the trigger, this is going to drop. That fires the rifle. You'll notice this has a big handle on it. In addition to working as a safety, you can also use this to recock the rifle like that and fire again if you have a dud round. And you can do this without unlocking the action. So if you have something like a hang fire, even if you go to give it a second strike, if it happens to detonate while you're doing that, the bolt's still locked, and so you won't have any catastrophic problems. You won't have any safety problems as long as you've kept the rifle pointed in the safe direction. Unfortunately, we don't have the original magazine for the rifle, but this is chambered for the Swiss, like the 7.5 by 53.5, the GP90 cartridge, and it would have almost certainly used essentially a copy of the standard Swiss military magazine of the time. And in fact, this actual Swiss military one does fit very nicely in the mag well. It just doesn't quite go in deep enough to lock. To disassemble, we're going to start by unscrewing this plug at the end of the gas piston section. Got these nice big wide square threads. And when this comes out, there's a little bit of tension in the recoil spring. There we go. So we can pull that out. That acts as a lock to prevent this rear end cap of the receiver from unscrewing. So once I've taken that out, I can just unscrew this. Note that down in the base of that, you can just barely see it. That round thing is a buffer spring, so that's going to absorb the last bit of recoil when the bolt travels backwards. Now we can pull out the bolt carrier and the gas piston. So there's our bolt and carrier. There's our gas piston, very simple. So we have a 2-lug rotating bolt, very similar to the Schmidt-Rubin system. To further disassemble it, I'm going to allow it to drop in. There's a firing pin spring in there that's under tension. Once this is all the way dropped down into the locked position, I can unscrew the safety. You'll remember I said this was physically attached to the back end of the firing pin. That's what I'm unscrewing. So that's the firing pin. We can remove the bolt. That is some gorgeous but intimidating machining. 3 sets of cam tracks in there to guide the bolt. And to be fair, you look at like a Steyr M95 with a straight pull rotating bolt system like this, and they're fairly stiff to run. This is extremely smooth, and I suspect that the multiple redundant tracks have something to do with it. The really nightmarish part, I suspect, to machine this would be making the lugs on the inside here of the bolt carrier. Oof. Now, the last bit of disassembly for the bolt would be to take this back section of the bolt and unscrew it. That would allow us to remove the firing pin, which is captive inside here. So I can pull this back. There's a firing pin spring inside. The end of the bolt here is, it's stuck in place. Like I tried unscrewing it, it doesn't want to come off. We know what's in there, and so I'm not going to force it and risk breaking anything. What I will do, though, is take off the barrel bands and the upper handguard so that you can see the actual gas block. All right, barrel bands are off. Lift the rear sight up. Lift off the handguard. And there you have the gas block. Really simple. Like, this is an elegant, clean, impressive semi-automatic system. I will point out here we do have this metal band, metal tube at the end of the barrel so that clamping down the nose cap, clamping down the stock and the handguard doesn't actually impinge on the barrel. They've inletted the stock so that it doesn't touch the barrel anywhere. It's free floated. Like, there's a lot of good work that went into this rifle. So when this is assembled in the gun, it's basically put together like this. We have a square lug on the gas piston that connects right there. This, let's see, the bolt in its locked configuration has the lugs vertical like this. When you fire, this block at the end of the bolt here, the safety, this is connected to the firing pin, and that is where the sear holds it. So when you pull the trigger, this has been held backwards, it's released, it goes forward, the firing pin protrudes through, the cartridge fires, gas is tapped out of the piston, out of the gas block, it hits this piston and pushes it backwards. Then the receiver is holding these locking lugs fixed in the locked position while the gas piston is pushing backwards here. So as the bolt carrier travels backward, those internal curved cams inside force the bolt to rotate until it is horizontal like this. Then it's unlocked, and then the whole thing can travel backwards. The recoil spring here is going to compress. There is then, of course, your little buffer spring at the back end of the receiver that this is going to hit. That'll absorb the last bit of energy of the bolt traveling backwards. So there's a little bit of spring pressure there. Then this spring re-expands, which pulls the bolt forward, chambers a new cartridge, and when this hits the front of the receiver, it twists over into its locked position, all ready to fire another round. So there you go. There is the 1902 pattern Stamm-Zeller Swiss experimental semi-auto prototype, all disassembled. By the end of 1905, the sample rifles have all been produced, and now it's time to really do some marketing and sell this rifle. So they do a fair amount of testing and shooting themselves. Allegedly, the last 2 rifles that were produced, they put 10,000 rounds through, which is, that's a pretty impressive number today, much less 120 years ago. They present the gun to the Swiss military. You know, obviously they've tried to make it very similar to the Swiss service rifles. I mean, like, we compare this to an actual Swiss service rifle, the stock's virtually identical. The barrel hardware is very similar, the sights are the same style. You would think that this would be a very interesting gun to the Swiss military, but it's not. And unfortunately, we don't have any testing records. We don't know why specifically the Swiss turned it down. Maybe cost, maybe reliability, maybe just intransigence of not trusting a semi-automatic rifle this early. The company looks for other clients. They submit the rifle for, well, they present the rifle to the Germans, the Russians, the Belgians, the Danish, and they get no contracts from anyone else either. So ultimately, the rifle never goes into production. By 1906, Zeller and Company is apparently kind of sick of dumping money into this empty pit that is the weapons division, where they've spent, boy, what would it be at this point, 5, 6, 8 years developing this beautiful rifle for literally no return. So the company shuts down its weapons division. Stamm leaves the company, he quits, and he goes and starts searching for work with other heavy industry and firearms manufacturers in Switzerland. He applies to W.F. Byrne, he applies to SIG, he applies to a number of other industrial companies, never again to manufacture the Stamm-Zeller. So it's an unfortunate, like, it's weird to me that this didn't get more recognition, and it's too bad that we don't have more documentation from its development or from its testing to explain what were the downsides of this rifle, because taking it apart, it looks a little bit expensive to make, but really simple, efficient, and a gorgeous semi-automatic design, especially compare it to what companies like Mauser were doing at this exact same time period. The Mauser self-loaders were far more complicated and not particularly reliable. Anyway, that will remain a mystery unless we find some more archival documents somewhere. Hopefully that'll happen. But a big thanks to the Swiss Shooting Museum for giving me access to this basically one-of-a-kind rifle. I think there's one other example that survives to this day, but that's it, and this one's in gorgeous condition. So if you are ever in Bern and find yourself with a couple hours to spare, definitely consider checking out the Shooting Museum. I have their contact info down in the description text. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.